you'll agree with me that, as with any great investigative documentary, this film is hard to watch. When I first saw it, there was a little voice in my head that kept trying to tell me that this wasn't true. This wasn't happening in my country, just a few hundred kilometers down the road from here. Now, it's not that we don't know there are problems with the temporary foreign worker program. It sounds terrible to begin with. And 2 years ago, right here, we gave an award to the CBC for exposing how banks and restaurants were abusing it, displacing qualified unemployed Canadians in favor of lower paid foreign workers, and depressing wages in cities across the country. And from time to time, we do see reports about scams and farm or road accidents in which migrant workers are the victims. But this film takes us deep inside the disturbing everyday reality facing the migrant workers themselves, who toil invisible to most of us in rural communities. And it exposes this program for what it too often is here, as a launching pad for coercion, exploitation, and outright criminality. Since 2006, hundreds of thousands of people have come to Canada from Asia, Mexico, the Caribbean, Central and South America to work long hours of manual labor in farms and in greenhouses, picking and packing fruit and vegetables. And they do it on the promise of a fair contract, and so they can send their savings back home. And we here in Canada break that promise. It's all there, the evidence, on the screen for us to see. We see people routinely shaken down for thousands of dollars in airfare and fees that their Canadian employers are, by law, required to cover. We see their squalid and unsafe living conditions, how they are shortchanged on their pay. Their every move when they're here is monitored. Their passports are taken away. If they don't pay the recruiter, they're threatened. Their hours are cut, or they're sent back home. In their faces, we see their disappointment, their frustration, and their fear. Incredibly, though, the brave women that Sook and Lisa filmed stood up to these crooked people and this crooked system. One imagines that they thought they had nothing left to lose. And amazingly, they won. The recruiter was convicted of extortion. Another is now facing human trafficking charges. And their company settled their claim for unpaid wages and illegal fees. It's an incredible achievement. And by documenting it, this film is now helping to drive this long struggle for justice. Already the federal government has made these workers less temporary and less vulnerable by removing the rule that forces them out after 4 years. And they've promised that more improvements are to come. So let's all hope that that's true too. Sook and Lisa, thank you for making this film, for your years of hard work and your talent. And thank you for refusing to give up on these people and on their and our dream of what Canada is supposed to be and what it's supposed to stand for, both here and around the world. So please come up and accept the 2017 Canadian Hillman Prize.
And I want to thank the Hillman Foundation for recognizing this film and this issue and drawing attention. I think the power of this particular recognition will certainly launch this issue into the national conversation in a way that it has needed to be for decades. We have had some extraordinary support from people who have been fighting really hard to allow filmmakers, independent journalists to continue doing the work that we do, and it's been an uphill battle, as all of you know in the room. We'd like to thank TVO for their unflagging support, Jane Jankovic in particular, who 3 years ago recognized the story and stood by us through many, many iterations of telling the story. It was interesting because when you're on the road and you're thinking, oh, I'm not with my daughter, my 2 daughters, and it's Mother's Day and everyone should be with their kids. And then I was with the women who are in the program and I realized, well, they're separated from their families. Some are separated for decades, 25 years. Workers have been in the seasonal agriculture worker program for decades, some workers. And I realize, it's really a matter of perspective in terms of those kinds of separations, and which separations are justified, which are normalized, and which are considered the everyday, and then which are more heartbreaking, whose separations are more human. And this is the lens that I started to understand when you're telling the story of migrant workers. Fundamentally, it's a program that dehumanizes workers. The workers in the temporary foreign worker program that we spent time with are largely workers from the global south. They're racialized workers, and they're workers who are poor workers. And there becomes a kind of a normalization of who naturally belongs in this category of a work program that ties workers to an employer and that treats workers as disposable.
I just want to thank, I'm half Filipino, I'm born and raised in Canada. My first introduction to migrant workers is members of my own family. I have a cousin's wife at Bathurst and Lawrence right now working 7 days a week as a domestic worker. I have an uncle who spent 15 years away from his children working as an engineer in the Middle East. I have another aunt in Saudi Arabia right now. They are our stories as Canadians, and I think it's important to realize that. They're not separate from us. They are literally my family, and I want to thank them all for instilling in me a sense of what really matters in the world.
Oftentimes we say this is a story that's undertold, and I think the story of migrant workers in Canada is undertold, not because workers don't want to tell their stories, but because I think the story is actively suppressed. Because there are many institutional, there are many economic, there are many political reasons why this story is not profitable or it doesn't serve a status quo to tell this story. Some of you may know back in 2000, I released a documentary called El Contrato with the National Film Board of Canada. And that documentary looked at Mexican workers, migrant workers in the seasonal agricultural worker program. When we tried to release that documentary, there was a libel suit launched against myself and the producers. A libel suit of $1 million threatening libel action should the film be screened and disseminated. And we had to fight for a creative solution to release that documentary, and it took a year to finally release El Contrato. So I understood that going into Migrant Dreams, there would be a lot of risks in telling the story. Having experienced the threat of libel before, I knew that when you're trying to tell the story of migrant workers, there could be risks, but aside from the risk to myself, what I recognized was the risk that workers took. So this is a documentary that in many ways is about worker resistance. And the clip that you saw, you see workers under incredible duress speaking out. And they put their own livelihoods on the line. They put their own, there was so much at stake. And they had the courage to speak out because they trusted me and they trusted you. And they trusted Canadians, believing that should their story be heard, that there's no way someone cannot do anything about the situation in which workers are coming into Canada under tied work permits. And I'd also like to thank an organization that was fundamental to this documentary being produced and being made. Justicia for Migrant Workers, Justice for Migrant Workers, is a grassroots volunteer advocacy organization. I'd like to invite Sazna Miranda and other members of Justicia who are in the room to come up here with me and say a few words about the battle and the fight we have before us, because this is just the beginning. Being able to have the 4-year cap removed was just one small victory in the battle that we have.
I was coordinating the campaign called Harvesting Freedom, which was a caravan, 1,600-kilometer caravan from Windsor area to Ottawa, to the nation's capital, to put pressure on the federal government to extend permanent resident status for migrant workers on arrival. Right now, if you bring your spouse or if you're a high-skilled worker with a university or a master's degree, you'd be coming to Canada with status, right? You don't come on a work permit. You don't come with limited access to OHIP, to housing, or any other essential services like education. But if you're a migrant worker in so-called low-skilled work, which is a very racialized and gender-based division of labor, then you must come under temporary status. And like the women you saw in the film, and also in film, Min's other film, El Contrato, you come here under very precarious circumstances, and you're essentially set up to not be able to access any of the other rights that you would have as a resident. Human rights, housing rights, labor rights, immigration rights. So 2016 marked the 50th year of the farm worker program in Canada. So for now, half a century, we've been feeding our families and putting food on our tables because of people that will never be able to permanently join us. Yet they've been here for 50 years. So there's nothing temporary about the temporary foreign worker program, right? It's a permanent feature of the way we feed our families, of the way we build communities and we build the economy. And so we said, okay, it's enough. This caravan will mark the fact that there's nothing temporary about it, and that real change, which was the basis of a platform that got our current federal leader elected, really needs to be seen through immigration status if we want to see workers be able to access any kind of human or labor rights. So Min's film was huge in allowing us to connect communities in a way that people could understand and could see accessibly. They can see what's happening. And as Min said, you know, you want to think that once somebody has seen the stories, that they'll act, right? Yeah, so we really want to thank Min Sook for the space and for the film and for the work that she's been doing with us for more than 10 years now. Yeah, so thank you.
Okay.
Guys.
Thank you very much.